The translucent doors of the Centauri Imperial Palace slid open with a whisper, and Julian Reeves fought to keep his expression neutral as two crystalline-skinned guards led him into the throne room. Their bioluminescent markings pulsed with a steady blue rhythm, a stark contrast to the racing of his heart. The chamber stretched impossibly high, its walls adorned with living metal that shifted like liquid mercury. Empress Nishara sat upon her crystalline throne, her skin shimmering with patterns of starlight. 4 arms, each adorned with rings of precious metals, rested gracefully on the armrests. Her eyes, 3 of them arranged in a triangle, were the color of distant nebulae. She was beautiful in the way a supernova was beautiful, mesmerizing and lethal. So this is the human diplomat who wandered into restricted space. Her voice carried the harmony of multiple tones, like a chord played on an alien instrument. How fascinating. Julian remained silent, though every fiber of his being wanted to explain that his ship's navigation system had malfunctioned. He understood perfectly well what she was saying. The neural implant hidden beneath his skull translated every word, but revealing that knowledge now would be suicide. The Empress rose, her robes of living crystal chiming softly as she descended the dais. "They say humans are clever creatures," she mused, circling him, but seemingly not clever enough to avoid straying into Centauri territory. She switched to speaking in the common trade language. "Do you understand me now, little one?" Julian gave her the expected blank look, then allowed his expression to shift to one of confusion and fear. It wasn't entirely an act. The Empress smiled, revealing teeth like polished opals. "Perfect," she purred, returning to her native tongue. "I've always wanted a human pet. They're so wonderfully expressive." She gestured to one of her attendants. "Prepare quarters in my private wing. I want this one close." The next 3 days were a study in careful observation. Julian was given luxurious quarters that were clearly designed to be both comfortable and confining. The walls rippled with the same living metal as the throne room, and while there were no visible barriers, he knew attempting to leave would trigger security measures. Servants, some mechanical, others organic, attended to his needs. They dressed him in flowing robes of shimmering material that felt like liquid silk against his skin. They'd brought him exotic foods that his implant analyzed for toxins. All the while, he played the role of the confused but gradually adapting human, careful to maintain just the right level of uncertainty in his movements. The Empress visited daily, sometimes speaking to him in trade language, other times chatting freely in her native tongue to her advisors, as if he were merely a decorative object. That was when he learned the most. "The outer colonies grow restless," one advisor reported, his crystalline form fracturing light into rainbow patterns. "They speak of independence." "Let them speak," Nishara replied, absently stroking Julian's hair as he sat near her feet. "Words are wind, but watch carefully who speaks loudest. Those are the ones we'll need to. Quiet." Julian fought to keep his breathing steady, his muscles relaxed. Every conversation was a piece of a puzzle, revealing the complex political web he'd stumbled into. The Centauri Empire was vast, but not as stable as it appeared. Rebellion simmered at its edges, and even here in the heart of power, Julian caught glimpses of tension in the way certain advisors looked at each other. That evening, as servants prepared him for sleep, Julian reflected on his situation. He wasn't just a diplomatic hostage anymore. He was becoming something far more valuable, an invisible observer in the halls of power. Every word spoken freely in front of the pet was intelligence that could reshape relations between humanity and the Centauri. As he drifted off to sleep, the living metal walls pulsing with a soft glow, Julian allowed himself a small smile. The Empress thought she had captured a simple human diplomat. Instead, she had given one of Earth's top xenopolitical agents unprecedented access to her inner circle. The game was just beginning. 2 weeks into his captivity, Julian began noticing the patterns beneath the patterns. The Empress's court moved like a complex dance, but beneath the graceful movements lay currents of discontent. He watched it all from his privileged position at Nishara's feet, playing the role of an ornamental pet while his enhanced senses captured every detail. The first crack in the facade appeared during a private council meeting. High Commander Rickson, his crystalline form darker than most Centauri, stood before the Empress with his head bowed. "The mining colony on Nexus VI has ceased all shipments," he reported, his voice carrying harmonics of concern. "They claim equipment failures, but our intelligence suggests otherwise." Nishara's fingers, which had been idly stroking Julian's hair, paused. "Equipment failures," she repeated, her three eyes narrowing. "How convenient." She switched to trade language, addressing Julian directly. "What do you think, pet? Should we believe such excuses?" Julian carefully arranged his features into a look of pleasant confusion, though his mind was racing. Nexus VI. That was where the largest deposits of quantum crystals were found, the rare mineral that powered Centauri faster than light drives. A disruption there could cripple their fleet movements. The Empress laughed, returning to her native tongue. "Look how earnestly he tries to understand. Adorable." Her fingers resumed their movement through his hair, but there was tension in the gesture now. "Send Admiral Vex to investigate." Quietly. Later that night, as Julian sat in his quarters analyzing the day's events, he heard voices in the corridor. He moved silently to the door, his neural implant enhancing the sound. "The Empress grows distracted," a voice whispered. He recognized it as Second Counselor Mira, her crystalline form always tinted with hints of rose. "This human pet of hers is a weakness we can exploit," another voice replied. "High Commander Rickson. She spends hours with it, speaks freely in front of it. Her attention wanders from matters of state." Julian's pulse quickened, but he maintained his steady breathing. This was valuable intelligence, but also dangerous. If they suspected he understood them, the outer colonies would support a change. Mira continued, her voice barely a whisper, "especially with the disruptions on Nexus VI. Patience," Rickson cautioned. "We move too soon, we lose everything. Let her continue to be distracted. Let her guard down." Their footsteps faded, but Julian remained still, processing. A conspiracy against the Empress, using him as an unwitting tool. The irony might have been amusing if the stakes weren't so high. A destabilized Centauri empire could throw the entire sector into chaos. The next morning, as servants dressed him in new robes of shifting colors, Julian noticed something different. The attendants' movements were more hesitant, their glances more calculating. Word was spreading through the palace. The Empress's pet was becoming a symbol of perceived weakness. During court that day, Julian paid special attention to Rickson and Mira. Their crystalline forms might have appeared similar to an untrained eye, but his implant detected subtle variations in their bioluminescent patterns, stress indicators, signs of anticipation. They were planning something. Nishara seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, or perhaps she was better at hiding her awareness than Julian had credited. She continued to treat him as a prized possession, speaking freely of state matters in his presence. The trade negotiations with the Arcturus Federation are proving difficult, she told her advisors, while Julian sat nearby, apparently absorbed in examining a holographic butterfly she had given him to play with. "They demand access to our quantum crystal refineries." "Perhaps," Mira suggested, her rose-tinted form shifting slightly, "we should consider their offer. A show of flexibility." Julian noticed the slight harmonic change in her voice. She was probing, testing the Empress's reaction. Nishara's response would be crucial. "Flexibility," the Empress repeated, her three eyes focusing on Mira with sudden intensity. An interesting choice of words, Second Counselor. The tension in the room crystallized. Julian kept his attention on the butterfly, but his enhanced senses captured every subtle shift in the advisors' positions, every flicker of their bioluminescent patterns. The game was becoming more dangerous, and he was caught in the middle of it. That evening, As the Empress retired to her private chambers with Julian in attendance, he made a careful decision. He allowed himself to react, just slightly, to a comment she made in her native tongue. A tiny shift in expression that could be dismissed as coincidence, but he knew her three eyes missed nothing. The game was evolving, and so must his strategy. The atmosphere in the palace shifted like quicksilver. Julian's tiny reaction had not gone unnoticed. The Empress's touches lingered longer, her three eyes studying him with newfound intensity. She began testing him, dropping subtle cues in her native tongue, watching for responses. Yet she said nothing directly. It became a delicate dance between them, each aware of the other's awareness, but maintaining the charade, all while the conspiracy tightened around them like a noose. The fleet movements near Nexus VII are concerning, Admiral Vex reported one morning, his crystalline form pulsing with urgent patterns. Ships are gathering, but not ours. Mishara's hand tightened slightly in Julian's hair. Whose? They bear colonial markings, Your Majesty, but their movement patterns suggest military precision. Someone is coordinating them. Julian kept his face carefully blank, but his mind raced. The pieces were falling into place. The mining colony's equipment failures, the gathered ships, Rixon's careful positioning. Later that day, as Julian sat in the garden chamber watching light fracture through crystal trees, he heard urgent footsteps. A servant hurried past, not noticing him behind the crystalline foliage. Commander Rixon demands immediate deployment. The servant whispered to another. The Empress must not be informed until. The rest was lost as they moved out of range, but Julian had heard enough. The coup was beginning. He had a choice to make. That night, when the Empress summoned him to her private chambers, he found her standing by the vast window overlooking the capital city. Her crystalline form seemed to absorb the starlight, making her appear almost translucent. "You understand everything I say, don't you, little one?" she asked in her native tongue, not turning around. Julian stood, dropping the pretense of submission. "Yes, Your Majesty." Her laugh held no humor. "How long?" "From the beginning. Neural translator implant. Standard issue for diplomatic course." Diplomatic course. Now she did turn, her three eyes focusing on him with laser intensity. "You're more than a simple diplomat." "Yes, just as you're more than you appear to your conspirators." A smile curved her opal lips. "You know about the coup, then?" "Rixon moves his forces tonight. The mining colony disruption was a feint. He has loyal ships hidden in the debris field. They'll strike at the heart of your fleet while the colonial ships draw attention at Nexus VI. And you share this because a destabilized Centauri empire benefits nobody, least of all humanity. Julian stepped closer. "You've known about their plot all along, haven't you?" "Of course." She gestured to the city below. "You think I maintain power through ignorance. I let them think me distracted. Let them grow confident." Her form rippled with dangerous colors. "Even let them think you were my weakness." "But now they move too soon," Julian said, "before your countermeasures are in place." "Perhaps." She studied him. "Unless I had help. Someone who could transmit orders that wouldn't be traced to me. Someone they think is merely a pet." Julian smiled. "Your encryption codes." She waved her hand, and a holographic display materialized. "Try not to start an interstellar war." Working quickly, Julian sent the coded commands. Loyal fleet elements hidden throughout the Empire would activate, cutting off Rixon's escape routes. Colonial governors who had stayed faithful would lock down their territories. "It's done," he said finally. "Though you realize this changes everything between our peoples." "Of course." She moved closer, her crystalline form catching the starlight. "You've proved humans are far more capable than anyone suspected. Your people have earned a place at the table. And my role here?" "That depends." Her three eyes held his. "How do you feel about becoming an official advisor rather than a pet? Someone who can speak freely in my court?" Before Julian could respond, alarms blared. Through the window, they watched as energy weapons lit up the night sky. The coup had begun, and would end. In a single night. A new era begins, Nishara said softly. For both our peoples. Julian nodded, watching the light show above. He had come here as a captive, played the role of a pet, and would emerge as something entirely new. A bridge between two civilizations. As messages of Rixon's forces surrendering began flowing in, he allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the best power was the kind that no one saw coming. Both he and Nishara had proved that tonight. In the days that followed, the Centauri Empire would be transformed. New alliances would be forged, old prejudices challenged. And at the heart of it all, a human who had turned a golden cage into a seat of influence, proving that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its weapons or technology, but in its ability to adapt, observe, and turn disadvantage into opportunity. The game had changed, but in many ways, it was just beginning. 1 month after the failed coup, the Centauri Imperial Palace hummed with a different energy. Where once Julian had knelt at the Empress's feet, he now sat at her right hand, his official title of Interspecies Relations Advisor, carrying weight that made crystalline nobles shimmer with barely concealed unease. The throne room had been redesigned. Alongside the Empress's crystalline seat now stood a smaller but equally elegant chair, crafted from a fusion of human and Centauri aesthetics. It was a symbol, Nishara had explained, of the changing times. The Arcturus Federation delegation arrives tomorrow, Julian noted, reviewing holographic reports that floated before him. His neural implant interfaced seamlessly with Centauri technology now, another sign of the integration between their peoples. They're nervous about these new arrangements. Nishara's 3 eyes shifted in an expression he'd learned to read as amusement. Let them be nervous. Change always breeds uncertainty. Her crystalline form rippled with subtle colors. What interests me more is how quickly the outer colonies have fallen in line. Fear and respect are powerful motivators, Julian observed, when they saw how efficiently you crushed Rixon's rebellion. She corrected. How efficiently we crushed it. Your role in those events has not gone unnoticed. That was true enough. Stories had spread through the empire of how the Empress's pet had revealed himself to be a master strategist, helping to coordinate the response that had trapped the rebels. Some called it a brilliant deception. Others whispered that humans were more dangerous than anyone had suspected. Both reactions served their purposes. A servant entered, their crystalline form vibrating with urgency. Your Majesty, we've received a transmission from Earth's central government. They're requesting to establish a permanent embassy within the palace district. Julian kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he smiled. Right on schedule. The wheels he'd set in motion were turning exactly as planned. An embassy. Nishara's tone was thoughtful. That would be unprecedented. No non-Centauri has ever been permitted to establish a permanent presence in the capital. Times change. Your Majesty, Julian said softly, as someone recently reminded me. Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. This had always been part of the larger game, not just surviving the coup, but reshaping the relationship between their species. Arrange quarters for the Earth delegation, Nishara commanded. And Julian, she switched to perfect English, surprising him. I trust you've been teaching me your language for exactly this moment. He inclined his head, acknowledging the move. Of course she had been learning, just as he had been teaching her. They were both too strategic to waste any advantage. Later that evening, as they stood on the private balcony overlooking the capital's crystalline spires, Nishara spoke again. The other houses whisper that I've given humans too much influence, that my former pet now pulls strings they cannot see. And what do you think? Julian asked. I think they fail to understand that power shared is not power diminished. She turned to him, her form catching the light of the setting sun. They see our arrangement as weakness. They cannot comprehend that true strength lies in adaptation. Julian nodded, watching ships trace luminous paths through the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, Earth vessels were already en route, carrying diplomats, traders, and cultural exchanges. The barriers between their peoples were falling, one by one. "We've started something unprecedented," he said. "A true partnership between species." "Yes," she agreed, "though I suspect neither of our peoples fully realizes what that means yet." She was right. This was just the beginning. As the stars emerged above them, Julian reflected on how far they'd come from those first days of his captivity. He was no longer a pet, she no longer just an empress. They had become something new, architects of a future neither of their species had imagined possible. The game continued, but now they played it together, weaving a tapestry of alliance that would reshape the galaxy. And somewhere, in the depths of space, other powers watched and wondered what this new partnership would mean for them all. The sun set on the Crystal City, but dawn was breaking on a new era. And Julian Reeves, once a captive playing at being a pet, now stood at its threshold, ready to help guide both their peoples into whatever lay ahead.